Hi everybody, I hope you like the last book that I read for you, which was Armadillo Rodeo, which is sitting right over there on the desk. That was a lot of fun to read. Miss Hitchings asked me to read another book for you, so I'm going to be reading for you Wee Gillis by a guy named Munro Leaf. And the illustrations, those are the drawings, are done by a guy named Robert L. Lawson. Now, if you look at this book, it's kind of like torn up, and this is the second attempt I've had at reading it because it started to fall apart. Okay, it's been read so many times by Miss Hitchings and her brother Patrick, and this was his book. He was given it in 1990 as a gift. It's been read so many times that it's fallen apart, and it's a good book. And that's what you do. You read your books maybe until they fall apart. Okay. Then you buy another book. One thing you could do is if you've read a book and you're not reading it anymore, what can you do with that book? You can donate it to the library, either the library at your school or the Monroe County Public Library. Okay, so we're going to read Wee Gillis. I don't have as many voices in this one. Okay. And hopefully the book won't fall apart while I'm reading it. Here we go. Wee Gillis lived in Scotland.
And there is a beautiful picture of Scotland. It's all in black and white.
His real name was Alistair Roderick Craiggillachie Dalhousie Gowan Donnybristle Mac. But that took too long to say, so everybody just called him Wee Gillis.
And there is Wee Gillis. He's a fine looking lad, isn't he?
His mother's relations were all lowlanders. They stayed down in the valleys and raised long-haired cows. His father's relations were all highlanders. They stayed up in the hills and stalked stags. Wee Gillis didn't know which he wanted to be, a lowlander or a highlander. His mother's relations all thought that his father's relations were very foolish to run and climb and creep around the hills stalking stags. His father's relations all thought that his mother's relations were very silly to drive and call and milk their long-haired cows. Wee Gillis didn't know, but he watched them both, and he was cheerful and amiable. So, for 1 year, he went to live in the lowlands with his mother's relations.
There in a beautiful lowland.
Every day, he rose early and ate a large bowl of oatmeal.
That's a large bowl of oatmeal.
That's about 5 pounds of oatmeal. I couldn't eat that much oatmeal myself. Then he drove the long-haired cows out along the valleys, and at night he called and called them and drove them home again in time for his mother's relations to milk them. Once he was late in getting them home. When the relations all asked him what had kept him, and he had to tell them that the cows wouldn't come when he called. Then the relations all said that he didn't shout loud enough, and that the cows couldn't hear him through the heavy mist.
Oh, they're not very happy.
So every night when the mists would come down over the valleys, wee Gillis would shout a little louder than he had before. That was fine for his lungs, and by the end of the year they were very, very strong.
There he is, yelling and shouting for the cows.
On the first day of the new year, wee Gillis went up to the highlands. Every day he rose early and ate a large bowl of oatmeal with his father's relations. Oh, they eat a lot of oatmeal too. That's a mixing bowl of oatmeal. Then he set out walking and crawling, running and creeping all over the hills, stalking stags. He would hide behind thistles and sit on the heather, and sometimes he would have to be quiet for hours at a time, that you would have thought he was a stone. Once, while he was stalking, he sighed a big sigh because he had stayed still for so long, and the noise that it made frightened the stag so that it ran away. Then the relations all told wee Gillis that he didn't keep quiet enough and that he must learn to hold his breath. So, day after day, sitting among the thistles and on the heather, wee Gillis would hold his breath longer and longer to keep from sighing so he wouldn't frighten the stags. That was fine for his lungs, and by the end of the year, they were very, very strong. Don't go holding your breath like that. That's not healthy for you. Might be just fine for wee Gillis. So, year in and year out, wee Gillis would take turns calling the cows in the lowlands and stalking the stags in the highlands, and all the while his lungs grew stronger and stronger. Oh, look at that lad now. He's getting big and strong now, isn't he? Look at that. At last the day came when he must make up his mind and decide forever which to be. A lowlander who called cows, or a highlander who stalked stags. Bright and early in the morning there were two loud knocks on his door. When he opened it, there stood his Uncle Andrew from the lowlands and his Uncle Angus from the highlands. Gillis put on his kilt in a hurry, and away they went out into the morning. They walked and walked, not saying a word, down through the valleys and up over the hills, until they found just the right spot for deciding. Then his Uncle Andrew and his Uncle Angus stopped and stood very still. They turned to wee Gillis. He was exactly halfway up the side of a medium-sized hill, not in the lowlands and not in the highlands, just in the middle, and he had to choose forever. Gillis looked down and Gillis looked up. Then he looked at his uncles and they began to talk. First, they pleaded and then they begged very softly and very quietly, one at a time, and they politely waited for each to finish what he had to say before the other began. But still, wee Gillis could not decide. So the uncles' voices grew louder and louder, and they didn't wait for each other to finish talking anymore, but shouted and screamed and yelled until they jumped up and down and stomped their feet. They're getting angry. I hope it doesn't result in a Donnybrook. You could hear them shouting all the way down in the valleys and all the way up in the hills.
Everybody's getting quite alarmed, aren't they?
Suddenly, his uncle stopped jumping and shouting because a very large man had come up behind them. He was carrying something brown and big, but he put it down beside a rock. And then he looked at wee Gillis, and then at Uncle Andrew, and then at Uncle Angus. When they were very quiet, he sat down on a rock. He picked up the big brown thing that looked like a sack with sticks on it and took a deep breath and puffed his cheeks and shut his eyes and blew into one end of it with all his might. But nothing happened. He shook his head sadly and tried again, but nothing happened. And then he was very sad, and he said so. He was almost ready to cry because he was a bagpiper, and he had just made these fine new bagpipes to play on, but he had made them too big, and he didn't have breath enough to blow them. Uncle Andrew was sorry for him, so he tried to blow them, but he couldn't. Uncle Agnes was very sorry for him too. I'm sorry, I messed that one up. It's not Agnes. Uncle Angus was sorry for him too, so he tried to blow them, but he couldn't. Agnes, what was I thinking with that one? Angus, not Agnes. But he can't blow him either. So they all sat down on the rocks and were sad together. Wee Gillis wished that his uncles would ask him to try, but they didn't. So he just stood and looked as though he would like to. After a long time, the large man noticed him and shook his head slowly. But because Wee Gillis looked so wanting to, the large man asked him if he would like to try. Wee Gillis said, "Aye." So he did. First he took a deep breath the way he used to when he was going to call the cows on a misty night in the lowlands. Then he held it the way he used to when he was sitting very still, stalking stags in the highlands. And then he blew with all the force in his very, very strong lungs. The bag filled up and let out a screech through every one of its pipes, and the large man and Uncle Andrew and Uncle Angus fell off the rocks with surprise. So the large man taught him how to make music. And now Wee Gillis is welcome down in the lowlands and up in the highlands. But most of the time, he just stays in his house, halfway up the side of a medium-sized hill, and plays the biggest bagpipes in all Scotland. And that's the story of Wee Gillis. Sorry for the couple of mistakes I made in there. Okay? I didn't want to start the video over because I was just having way too much fun. Okay? So that's a great book. Okay? And I think what I like about it, I'll tell you. I like it because it's about getting stronger. Here you got this young boy, right? And he goes and he learns how to call the cows. He's taught how to call the cows with a loud voice. He's taught how to hold his breath when he's hunting for stags. And you want to be careful. Don't go practicing holding your breath a long time, right? Right? That's not something you want to do for like minutes at a time or anything. That's not what he's doing. But he built up his lungs really strong. And I'll bet you too, walking all that way up and down the highlands and into the lowlands and everything like that probably was good exercise for him too. And you could see him. He got stronger. His chest got bigger. Then he was able to play those powerful bagpipes, right? And then his family didn't force him to make a decision. He didn't have to make that tough decision. Right? Now, I'll tell you a little personal thing. My family is from Scotland originally, right? Through Ireland and Canada, okay? That's why my last name is Scott, right? And one of my great-great-grandmothers was named, her last name was Little, before she married a guy named Mark Scott, my great-great-grandfather. And they came from Ireland, but their ancestors came from probably lowland Scotland, right there on the border with England. All right, so you can get out a map and you can go ahead and look at the Highlands of Scotland and the lowland of Scotland, and you can learn a little bit about that. All right, great book. Also, too, you can go on YouTube. Your parents can help you find bagpipe music on YouTube, and you can listen to bagpipes if you've never heard bagpipes before. I like bagpipes. Some people don't like them. They say they're just screechy on the ears. I like them a whole lot. Okay, so that's a great book. I want to apologize to Miss Hitchings. Her book is falling apart. I started to read it, my first attempt at reading this book, and as I started to read it, the pages fell out because, like I said, it's been read a lot, and that's what you're supposed to do with books. You're supposed to read them a lot, right? And her brother and she probably loved this book so much that they read it to the point to where it fell apart, right? And remember, too, You read a book, you get done with it. If you think you're done with it, and everybody in your family's done reading it, what can you do with the book if it's in good shape? You can take it down to the Monroe County Library and donate it once the library is open. Right now it's closed because of the pandemic, right? But you can also donate it to your school library. I bet your librarian would take it. Okay, another thing that you could do is you can also donate it to the Hoosier Hills Food Bank book drive that they have every year. And what they'll do is they'll turn around and they'll resell your book and they'll make some money for the Hoosier Hills Food Bank, which is a really good cause. So those are good causes. If you got a book and you're done with it, don't just let it sit on your shelf and gather dust. Share the book. Give it to somebody and let them enjoy it too. Particularly if it's something really cool like Wee Gillis or Armadillo Rodeo, which should be read and read again. And then when you're done with them, give them to another kid so that they can enjoy them too. It's been a lot of fun reading for you guys. Thanks. If I get any more kids' books and Miss Hitchings wants me to read for you, I would be happy to do it if you like it.
We'll see ya. Y'all take care now, and don't eat too much oatmeal. That was a huge bowl of oatmeal. I mean, it was a mixing bowl this big. It had to have been 5 pounds of oatmeal. What do they call oatmeal? In Scotland, they call it porridge. Y'all take care. Bye. Oh, I forgot one thing to tell you. Porridge, oatmeal, it's very healthy for you. It's good for your heart. I've got me some oats right here, some porridge. And I've got me a big mixing bowl, just like Wee Gillis. And I've got me a big spoon, just like Wee Gillis. So tomorrow morning, I can make my porridge, my oatmeal, and eat a healthy meal that will stick to the ribs. You should too. It's excellent for you. It's very good for you. Oh, yeah. And I've got this too. Right. Yep. Here. I've got this for you. You hear that? That, laddies and lassies, is Scotland the Brave bagpipe music. I saved you the trouble of having to go look for it. So now, I've got my bagpipe music. I've got my big spoon. I've got my oatmeal. What happened to my mixing bowl? I put it somewhere, eh? Mrs. Scott! I've lost my mixing bowl. Have you seen it? Oh well, I'll find it later. It makes you just want to dance, doesn't it?